So good afternoon everyone, my name is Mahesh, Balani. And if you're wondering why I have that on the screen, it's only to remind you that lunch is going to be served in about half an hour from now. And you better measure yourself before and after, because we don't want you falling off asleep in the second half of the session today, okay? So with that, quick introduction about what Anthill Ventures does. Anthill Ventures is a small venture capital fund. We definitely don't have the big millions that some of our other esteemed investors spoke about earlier. But we do something very unique. We call ourselves a speed scaling platform. And what that means is we connect startups and we connect large investors, bring them together and help the startups raise capital, either through our own investments or syndication of investments. And the other thing that we do is we bring in, a lot of help for the startups. And we spoke about mentoring, we spoke about value add. One of the ways that we've at least tried to deliver value add is actually in establishing big relationships between companies that have existing customers and startups who have some new technology, some new idea, and how do we bring them together so that the startup gets the benefit of the enterprise's customers and opens up sales channels. And at the same time, it's these enterprises that are leveraging startups to drive innovation, to co-innovate solutions. So that's an attempt at bringing these two together and therefore creating an ecosystem. Personally, the introduction spoke about me, but very quickly, I've also been an entrepreneur myself, and an investor for the last 3 years now, apart from the equity investment that I do. But more importantly, I've worked on driving transformation programs for a number of large enterprises, both in the services and in the manufacturing space. And hopefully, some of that, I'll share with you, and maybe you'll learn a few things. So, I'm sure you know what this picture is. It is Mount Everest. And, one of the things about Mount Everest is that whether you, in your lifetime, actually scale this peak or not, it always is something that, fascinates all of us, right? I'm sure many of you would have seen the movie Everest. How many have seen the movie? Fascinating movie. I mean, a little tragic towards the end in terms of the ending. But I think the sheer, pain and the passion that was shown in the movie makes you want to do it yourself, right? So there are about 4 billion plus adults in the world, and only a few 100,000 of them actually dream about scaling this peak, okay? And of those, only about 10,000 plus actually train to make an attempt. And of those 10,000, every year, you only have about 1,000 people reaching base camp in order to make the final scaling up attempt. And of those 1,000, can anyone guess how many actually scale in a year? 50? 100? 10? 5? No. 5 is an interesting number, I'll come to it, but that's not the right answer. It's actually 600. Every year, 600 out of the 1,000 that attempt actually reach the top. And there is enough statistics about 70% being on the south side and the 30% being on the north side. What's the point of all this? The point of all this is that getting to that top is not that easy, right? Now you're probably wondering that, I didn't pay all this money and come all the way for this guy to stand here and tell me that climbing Mount Everest is not easy. You obviously know it. But there is another point in this story, okay? And that 5, by the way, was the number of fatalities in a year. So those out of the 605 that actually go on top, 5 don't come back, so that's the number. And these are just averages. If you look at this graphic, right? Setting up and scaling a business is very much like scaling Mount Everest, okay? But what happens is that most entrepreneurs, and these are the ones that we've experienced in our investing journey, they don't seem to get past the startup summit. So once they've reached a certain level of scale, they believe that they've actually scaled the summit. The real journey actually becomes even more dangerous when you get into the growth stage. And that's where most of the startups actually begin to die. So it's actually much easier for you to get from zero to, let's say, an MVP or some kind of a proof of concept because you probably try it in a smaller group, in the local area, with friends, with family. But once you get past that stage, that's when the real journey begins. Has this ever happened to you? When you're asked, what do you do? And what you hear is, our startup idea is like Uber meets Warby Parker, meets Birchbox, meets Snapchat, and so on and so forth. And if you're an investor in this room, sitting on the right side of that table, you're probably nodding your head. You've heard this story a number of times, right? And somebody in the panel discussion spoke about, I'm taking my idea to an investor. What's the safety, right? There is no safety because the idea, if you really think about it, is only the beginning, okay? Heard about the Pareto Principle? Who's heard about the Pareto Principle? I think almost everyone. 20-80, 80-20. It basically means with 20% of the effort, you actually get 80% of the results, which is what all of us do in our lives, right? You're very happy with 80% result with 20% effort, and therefore it works for you. But in the startup world, okay, I have a slightly different spin to the Pareto Principle. And that is that only 5% of the whole picture is actually the idea. So for those of you who are thinking that I'm unique, my idea is unique, and just based on my idea, I'm going to be able to, make my company a unicorn, then I think you really need to think about some of those assumptions, okay? So you're probably wondering what's the remaining 95%, and I think in the panel earlier, I think Vineet spoke about it as well, which is that the rest is all about execution, okay? The rest, which is 95%, is all about execution. Now you can argue whether it's 595 or it's 1090 or it's 1585, and we can go on and on discussing and arguing about it. But the point of the matter is that the idea itself is not the larger part of what you're trying to do here. The larger and the more important part of what you're trying to do and you setting up your enterprise is in the execution, okay? And it's a tough job. It's very easy for me to stand here and say, idea is only 5%, rest is execution. But those of you who do it on a daily basis know how tough it is, right? So, it's tough. You have to do it. If you're the founder, you have to do it. And you better start doing it before someone else gets there, because, again, going back to the point about the idea is only 5%. And the rest is execution, but more importantly, execution with speed. So if you think that you're going to get an 8-hour sleep when you're an entrepreneur, please forget about it, right? Because it's those 1 or 2 years or 3 years in the beginning that's going to really define the journey for you. So role of capital, again, the panel discussed it at length, so I'm not going to get into a lot of the detail, but very important insight, and this is just based on my personal experiences, but at best, capital is only a fifth or 20% of what a startup really needs to scale. And you may think that, it's a much larger number, and, again, we can discuss and debate, but there's enough research and there's enough sort of study done to, poll startups and investors, and this is the number that most experts talk about. And it's very interesting because, I'm here standing as an investor, and if I'm here telling you that, look, only 20% of your journey is going to be because of the money that you get from me, then it actually puts my own, thesis at risk. But that's the reality. It's the other stuff that you have to do. It's the marketing that you have to do. It's the hustling that you have to do. It's the customers that you have to go and reach. It's the product that you have to focus on. It's the technology that you have to build. All of that is the real key in you being able to scale up. Capital is only 20%. And yet, this is one of the top reasons that entrepreneurs state when they say that they are not able to scale. Oh, VC funding is not available. Oh, investors are not taking enough risk. Oh, I'm knocking so many doors, but nobody's paying me my seed capital, right? So think about it. Every time you stand up and say investors are not actually investing, it's not because investors don't want to invest. I mean, that's the reason they're there. But you have to obviously think of what is your business missing before you can actually go and ask for money.